The beach looked ordinary in the daylight. Wide stretches of pale sand curved along the coast, and the ocean rolled in gentle, rhythmic waves. It was the kind of place tourists loved: quiet, beautiful, and peaceful. During the day, families walked along the shore collecting shells. Children ran through the surf, and fishermen waited patiently on the rocks. But when the sun went down, the beach became something else. Locals avoided it at night. No signs warned visitors. No fences blocked the entrance. Yet the people who lived nearby always made sure to leave before darkness settled over the water. There was a reason the tide sometimes came back wrong. One evening, a group of visitors decided to walk along the beach after dinner. The night was calm, and the sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with bright stars. The sound of waves crashing against the shore felt peaceful, almost hypnotic. The ocean was unusually quiet. The tide had pulled back farther than normal, exposing long stretches of wet sand and dark rocks, usually hidden beneath the water. Someone joked that it looked like the ocean had disappeared. Another pointed toward the distance. Far out on the exposed seabed lay strange shapes scattered across the sand. From where they stood, the shapes looked like dark piles of seaweed or driftwood. Curious, they walked closer. The air smelled strange the farther they went, thick, salty, and rotten. Soon they reached the first shape. It wasn't seaweed. It was a boat. An old wooden fishing boat, half buried in the sand, covered in rusted metal and cracked paint. Its surface looked ancient, as if it had been sitting there for decades. But no one remembered seeing it before. More shapes became visible in the moonlight. Another boat, then another. Dozens of them. Old fishing vessels, broken rowboats, pieces of docks, tangled nets, and splintered wood scattered across the seabed like a graveyard. The ocean had pulled back so far that it revealed things no one had seen before. Someone laughed nervously. This must be where everything lost at sea ends up. But the laughter faded quickly, because the silence was wrong. There were no seagulls, no wind. Even the waves had stopped. The ocean had gone completely still. Then someone noticed something moving. Far out in the darkness where the water used to be, something shifted slowly across the exposed seabed. At first it looked like a shadow. Then another movement followed, and another. Shapes were crawling across the sand. Too large to be animals. Too slow to be people. They moved in unnatural dragging motions, leaving long trails in the wet sand behind them. No one spoke. The shapes were getting closer. Moonlight finally revealed one clearly. It looked like a person, but something about it was terribly wrong. Its body moved stiffly, like something that had forgotten how joints worked. Its arms dragged heavily through the sand as it crawled forward. And its skin looked pale and bloated, stretched tightly over its limbs. More shapes appeared behind it. Dozens of them. They were coming from the direction of the ocean. Someone whispered a single sentence. "They're coming out of the water." That was where the sound returned. A deep, rumbling roar rolled across the empty seabed. The ocean was coming back. But the tide didn't move normally. Instead of slowly rising, the water surged forward violently, racing across the sand like a dark wall. And the crawling shapes suddenly began moving faster. Not toward the water, toward the shore. Panic exploded. Everyone turned and ran. The wet sand made running difficult, and the distance back to the dry beach suddenly felt impossibly far. Behind them, the tide rushed forward with terrifying speed. The crawling figures kept moving, dragging, climbing, chasing. Someone glanced back. The nearest figure was only 20 feet away now. Its face lifted toward the moonlight. What remained of its face? The skin had peeled away in places, revealing dark bone beneath. Empty eye sockets stared forward, yet somehow it still moved with purpose. More figures emerged from the darkness behind it. Some crawled. Some staggered upright. Some dragged broken legs through the sand. and all of them were moving toward the shore. The tide crashed across the seabed, swallowing the old boats and wreckage beneath roaring waves. Water surged around the figures but didn't slow them down. It pushed them forward. Closer, closer, closer. The group finally reached the dry sand and scrambled up the beach toward the safety of the boardwalk lights in the distance. Behind them, the ocean swallowed the exposed seabed once again. The figures disappeared beneath the rushing water. And then, everything stopped. The waves returned to their normal rhythm. The tide settled peacefully against the shore as if nothing had happened. Silence returned. No figures remained on the sand. No crawling shapes. Nothing. The beach looked exactly the same as it had earlier that evening, except for one thing. The sand behind the fleeing group was covered in dragging marks. Long, deep trails carved across the beach. And those marks continued past where the water had stopped. They stretched farther up the shore, farther than the tide had reached. The next morning, locals arrived early to check the beach like they always did after strange tides. They walked quietly along the sand, studying the ground. The dragging marks were still there, dozens of them, leading away from the water, leading into the tall grass beyond the dunes. The locals didn't follow them. They never did. Instead, they placed new warning signs along the entrance path leading to the beach. But the signs didn't mention the crawling figures. They didn't mention the graveyard of boats beneath the tide. They didn't mention the things that came back with the ocean. The signs simply said one thing: leave before dark. Most visitors ignored the warning because the beach looked calm, peaceful, beautiful, and the tide always seemed normal, until the night the ocean decided to pull back again and reveal what was waiting beneath it. The beach had always been quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet people search for when they want to escape busy cities. This quiet felt heavier, like the entire place was holding its breath. Even during the daytime, when the sun glowed over the water and the waves sparkled gently along the shore, there was something unsettling about the coastline. No crowds came here. No beach umbrellas. No lifeguards. Just miles of empty sand and the endless ocean. Locals rarely spoke about the beach. When they did, they usually said the same thing: don't stay after midnight. No one explained why. Most visitors assumed it was just another small-town superstition, until the lighthouse appeared. The beach had never had a lighthouse. Anyone who checked a map would confirm that. The nearest one stood miles away along a different stretch of coast. Yet on certain nights, far out in the darkness above the water, a dim white light could be seen slowly sweeping across the horizon, back and forth, like a lighthouse guiding ships through the night. The strange part was that the light didn't come from land. It came from somewhere in the ocean. One night, a lone visitor walked along the beach after dinner. The air was cool, and the waves glowed faintly under the moonlight. The quiet felt relaxing at first, the sound of water crashing softly against the shore. Then the light appeared. A slow beam passed across the ocean in the distance. It faded, then returned again. Curious, the visitor stepped closer to the water. The beam swept across the surface of the sea again, illuminating patches of rolling waves before disappearing into darkness. A lighthouse. But it wasn't on the cliffs. It wasn't near the shore. It was somewhere far out in the water. The visitor squinted into the distance, trying to see where the light was coming from. At first, there was nothing. Then the shape appeared. A tall shadow standing alone in the middle of the ocean. The top of it blinked with that rotating white light. It looked exactly like a lighthouse, except it hadn't been there earlier, and no one had ever built one in that location. The visitor pulled out a phone and zoomed in on the distant structure. The image became blurry, but something about the shape felt wrong. The lighthouse leaned slightly to one side. Its surface looked cracked and broken, like ancient stone that had been underwater for years, and the light itself flickered strangely, not like electricity, more like fire. The visitor lowered the phone. That was when the fog began to roll in. At first, it appeared as a thin layer creeping across the water. Within minutes, it thickened, spreading across the beach like a living thing. The lighthouse light continued sweeping through the fog, back and forth, back and forth. Then something strange happened. The beam stopped moving. Instead of rotating, it pointed directly at the shore, directly at the visitor. A sudden chill ran through the air. The fog grew thicker. The ocean became silent. Even the waves stopped crashing against the sand. The visitor slowly backed away from the water, but the beam followed. Wherever they moved, the white light remained fixed on them. Then the sound started. A low creaking noise drifted across the water, wood rubbing against wood, like an old ship struggling in rough seas. But the ocean was completely calm. The creaking grew louder. Then another sound joined it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps echoing somewhere inside the fog. The visitor froze. There was no one else on the beach, yet the footsteps were clearly moving across the sand. Closer, closer. The lighthouse beam flickered again. This time it illuminated something inside the fog. A figure, tall and thin, standing near the water's edge. Its shape barely visible through the thick mist. It looked like someone wearing long, dripping clothes. The visitor called out. No response. The figure didn't move. The beam flickered again. Now the visitor could see more clearly. The figure wasn't standing normally. Its body leaned forward unnaturally, as if its spine had been bent in the wrong direction. Its arms hung too long at its sides, and its head tilted slightly, facing the ocean. Not the visitor. The lighthouse beam flickered again. The figure vanished. The fog swallowed it instantly. The visitor's heartbeat pounded louder in the silence. Then the footsteps returned. But this time they came from behind. The visitor spun around. Nothing. Only fog. But the footsteps continued circling slowly through the mist. Crunch. 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 Each step pressing into the wet sand somewhere nearby. Then the lighthouse beam began rotating again. Back and forth. Back and forth. Every time it passed across the beach, the visitor saw brief glimpses of shapes in the fog. One figure, then two, then several. Tall silhouettes standing along the shoreline, watching the ocean. None of them looked toward the visitor. They all faced the lighthouse, like passengers waiting for something to arrive. The creaking sound grew louder. Now it sounded massive, like a giant wooden structure slowly shifting under pressure. The lighthouse lights suddenly flared brighter. The fog lit up like a white wall, and for one brief second, the visitor saw the truth. The lighthouse wasn't standing on solid ground. It was attached to something enormous, something floating, a massive black ship. Its body towered above the ocean, ancient and rotting, covered in broken masts and torn sails. The lighthouse stood in the center of the ship like a twisted tower, and the figures on the beach. They began walking toward the water, slowly, silently. One by one, they stepped into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves without resistance. The visitor ran. The fog swallowed the entire beach, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The footsteps returned again, this time following closely behind. The visitor ran faster. The sound of creaking wood roared across the water, as if the massive ship was turning. Then suddenly, the fog vanished. Just like that, the beach returned to normal. The waves crashed gently along the shore. The lighthouse was gone. The ocean stretched empty beneath the moonlight. The visitor collapsed in the sand, gasping for breath. Morning arrived hours later. When locals came to the beach, they found something strange along the shoreline. a single set of footprints leading toward the water, not away from it. And beside those footprints, carved deep into the sand, were several other tracks, long dragging marks, as if dozens of people had walked into the ocean during the night, but none had come back. The locals quietly erased the tracks before tourists arrived. They always did, because sometimes, when the fog rolled in at night, the lighthouse returned, still searching the shore, still waiting for more passengers.